Hey there, race fans. This is Nathan Brown, motorsports insider at the Indianapolis Star, here for another edition of the Inside Line. Here talking about the 2026 IndyCar schedule here with my co-host, as always, Joey Barnes. We've got a great episode for you today. We'll hit all the high notes and the low notes as well on the 2026 IndyCar schedule. We've got a new driver in the number 12 Verizon Chevy at Team Penske for the first time. Really ever, because David Malukas is only the second driver to ever run that car with that sponsor. So we'll break that all down for you too. Big news week after what was maybe a little bit of a quiet week a week ago. But hard to imagine that we're already almost 3 weeks removed from the season finale that Joseph Newgarden won at Nashville Superspeedway. I think a good amount of news coming here in the next couple weeks. But the thing that we have been waiting on was that schedule. We'll get to that here in a minute. But first, the news that came yesterday, the news that we have been expecting certainly for a couple weeks ever since the season ended, and something that I felt like, I kind of went back and forth on throughout the season on, is Team Penske going to keep Will Power? Are they going to go to David Malukas? Ultimately, they give Will Power a 1-year deal offer, or at least tried to. He declined the opportunity to have a private jet flown down to North Carolina to take him to Detroit to do any sort of negotiations after his win at Portland. He eventually lands at Andretti Global to replace Colton Herta. Colton Herta heading to Formula 2, eventually to a team to be named later, and will also be the test and development driver at Cadillac F1. So that leaves now the number 12 Verizon Chevy that David Malukas, 23-year-old fourth-year driver, who this year had been driving for AJ Foyt Racing, finished 11 in points. He steps into what he said in the press release are massive shoes. Joey, what was your take on this news that we knew was coming that finally got confirmed yesterday morning?
It feels like we've known that this was probably inevitable since what, like February? And
certainly a possibility for quite some time.
Yeah. And so reaction was obviously not surprised, just because it was expected. I think, I'd be curious what the actual details of the multi-year deal are. If it's a 2-for-1 type of thing with 2 years on with maybe a team or driver option for the third year or something like that. But all in all, and this isn't necessarily to surprise anyone or to wow anyone, but it feels like it's a year ahead of schedule. And we knew that from the jump. And, when you look back and it's like, well, in May, it looked like maybe they were on course for this to be the status quo because of where Malukas's results were at that time. Obviously finishing runner-up at the Indy 500 following the Marcus Ericsson disqualification from his runner-up finish. But you look at the way Will Power's season went, and you see the 1-year option, the 1-year extension that they tried to give him at the end of the year that he declined. It tells me that even Penske thought that maybe Malukas was a year away from schedule. It probably had less to do with where they felt Will Power was in terms of his pace, and probably more in terms of where they didn't see the growth that they wanted to out of Malukas. I think maybe, and I know that's subjective or speculative on my part, but that's just kind of what my optics see. I think at the end of the day, it'll be interesting because this is David Malukas's real second chance here. I mean, after what we know he went through with the McLaren thing, and we all felt for him when a mountain biking accident went wrong and he ultimately lost out on what was considered at the time, and still is, but we know how that third seat can be tricky at McLaren as of late. But, we all thought he was going to eventually be that guy, effectively what Christian Lundgaard is right now at McLaren. Mm-hmm. And for that to transition into this hiatus, not the hiatus, but these random events with Meyer-Shank Racing and doing these bits shortly after his return last year from that wrist injury, after being released from Arrow McLaren, to the AJ Foyt ride, and now he's here. it's an interesting career arc, but the bottom line is I think this is that opportunity, and there can be no excuses. There can be probably no more mountain biking, and it'll be good to see if he can step in and step up to that challenge. I think he can. I think the talent's there. I think it's just about, from a mental standpoint, having the patience to put it all together, because I think in some races we see him get probably a little impatient or maybe a little unfocused, and that's where we see sometimes him, for instance, drifting wide in corners and bumping the wall, scraping the wall, and bending a toe link or something like that. So it's going to be interesting to see. Not like I said earlier, not surprised, but certainly feels a year ahead of schedule.
It definitely, I think that one of the most important things you said there is the fact that, from what we understand, only a couple people really do know this answer, but the fact that Team Penske wanted to give something to Will Power 1 year. Now, did they offer that 1 year knowing that there was no way that he would accept it, just to make themselves look good and say, hey, we gave him something and he turned it down? I don't know. Who knows what they knew at that point about Will. That was just before, at least I think, we started hearing about the Colton Herta to Formula 2 that could, open a spot for Will Power stuff. It was after Andretti Global CEO Rob Edwards had confirmed that Marcus Ericsson would be back because he would be under contract. So I think, at least from what we knew, oftentimes there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, or a lot more that drivers or team owners know, and they learn about it before, obviously, we do. But I feel like, from what I understand, I think they would have liked to have Will Power back for another year. And so it's interesting that they had to go to what is essentially their plan B. And it's not a bad plan B. I think there's a lot of potential in David Malukas. He wouldn't have gotten an offer from Arrow McLaren if there wasn't potential there. Now, the interesting thing there is he was also plan C there. Alex Palou was obviously plan A. He turned down the ride. Marcus Ericsson was actually offered that ride to slide into the number 6. He had already was verbally down the road enough with Michael Andretti for his ride now at Andretti Global. And so they had to go to Malukas. Malukas was next up. Felix was already down the road with Meyershank Racing, and I think the team and him probably wanted, were both in their best interest of kind of getting a fresh start anyways. And so they went to Malukas, and we know how that happened. I feel like and it's not a perfect comparison, but I've found, over looking at this for the last couple of months, I think there's a really interesting comparison between where David Malukas is. I would say, technically speaking, he's raced in the IndyCar series in some way for 4 years, but he's really only like 3.5 years into his career. And so I look at where he is, where he had, I believe, 5 top 10s, two top 5s with that 4th place at Iowa, and then the runner up at Indy. I feel like his career and where he is right now looks a lot like Joseph Newgarden about 3 years in. 3 years in, his 3rd year at Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing, Joseph finished 13th in the championship. He had 7 top 10 finishes, a runner-up at Iowa. That was his 2nd runner-up finish in his career, similar to David Malukas. He had a 5th place finish at Milwaukee there, so 2 top 5s, same as David Malukas. And it was in that 4th season of his career, again, the team changed a little bit that off season into CFH Racing, which we now know as at Carpenter Racing. Joseph got to stay in that kind of low pressure environment, and he turned in a win 4 races into that 4th season at Barber, wins another time at Toronto, adds 2 more runner-ups that year, a pole in Milwaukee, finishes 7th in the championship, and then finishes 4th with a win, and is literally the best driver not at Team Penske in 2016 from the championship perspective, and ultimately beats the driver at Team Penske that he was replacing in Juan Pablo Montoya. So I say all of that to just kind of look at those two and where they are. And when it comes down to it, I do feel like this is probably 1 year too early for Malukas. Certainly a year earlier than Team Penske, I think, was meaning for this to be. Ultimately, if you are the driver that they think he is, I don't know that going somewhere a year early ultimately matters, because I think that means that you have the talent ultimately in you. And there's, there are great engineers, there are great mechanics, there are great folks within that organization, that if he still has some things around the edges to buff out, that will ultimately happen. It's not like he's getting dropped at Team Penske straight in 2022, coming out of his runner-up finish in the Indy Lights Championship. I think this is he's a matured driver. Is he mature enough? I know he gave me an incredible quote, and what I think was really accurate and honest after it was coming out of Worldwide Technology Raceway, where he had been fighting for the win there. He was making a pass around the outside of Kyle Kirkwood, frankly, at a moment where it didn't really need to. I think Kirkwood was maybe on cold tires, and Malukas was just kind of forcing the issue. And he got high up into the marbles. I think just kind of slapped the wall. It wasn't a race-ending issue, but took what was a likely podium and a certain top 5 and turned it into a finish outside the top 10 after he had kind of done the same with what he I guess it was 2 weeks before that at the streets of Detroit, where he was running right around the top 5, runs into the back of Alex Palou and shoots him off into a barrier and gets a drive-through penalty for avoidable contact. The quote essentially that he gave me after that race at Gateway was, I need to stop making stupid mistakes. I need to drive with some more patience. I'm a 23-year-old and I need to be acting like I'm 40. And I think that's still kind of where he is in his career. We saw those moments at Detroit and Gateway, and I was still expecting those to kind of be learning moments, and maybe we would see some more instances of David running up at the front the rest of this year. And we didn't quite get that. When you look at what his results, he had the great race at Iowa, the second race there. He had top 10s at Road America, Toronto, Milwaukee. Had some great qualifying performances, certainly, but was running obviously really well at Nashville when he and Louis Foster get tangled up. Obviously, Louis was docked for avoidable contact there, and that was maybe just another one of those instances from David that I think a veteran driver might have realized that Louis wasn't maybe racing them with the level of respect that they needed, and probably would have backed out, just live to fight another day, take out it at the next straightaway or the next lap or what have you. And maybe a driver that's a little bit more veteran gets a different result out of that. So I still feel like this is a driver that isn't, by no means is driving at his peak. He's got a lot to do to buff things out around the edges. And I think the biggest thing is he's going to be expected to win a race. I think we all know that David Malukas is going to win a race at some point in his career. That is going to be the expectation next year.
So just a few things I wanted to hit on before we move on to the schedule thing. And
Yeah.
these are some of the questions I have. So, or one's a statement, the rest are questions. So first, I kind of view David Malukas as like that elite college prospect quarterback, right? Like you've either, for the last 3.5 years, he's been running through college, let's say, with lesser teams in terms of equipment to a Penske, even though there was a technical alliance there with AJ Foyt Racing. So coming into a Team Penske situation, I think we're really about to see is David Malukas about to be that first round pick, or he is the first round pick for Penske, obviously. And it's like, well, are you going to be Anthony Richardson or are you going to be Peyton Manning? And I think we're really going to see that. And I think to that end, the things that I'm interested in are part of those mental mistakes because of maybe the lack of veterans around him from an engineering standpoint, on a timing standpoint. Who's going to be the engineer? Like, does he run into a situation where we know that James Schnabel has been the engineer for him at Foyt? and Schnabel's a Team Penske groomed prospect. Do they go together to that 12 team, or does Schnabel stay at Foyt? Do they have a different role for him? And Malukas is with all of Will Power's former crew. And does that help his development in terms of maturity, in terms of not making those mental mistakes that you touched on? And then also, and maybe I'm just twisting the knife here a little bit, but let's not forget that there's not necessarily all harmony between Malukas and some of the Penske boys in the past. I mean, him and McLaughlin had quite
also not harmony between the two Penske drivers that are still there too
exactly.
at the same time. And Will Power, I think, had kind of been the glue. At least, we see only a fraction of what goes on, between drivers. But I think back to that moment in the press conference at Iowa, where I don't know, Joseph was getting asked a question he clearly didn't want to answer. I mean, that was most of them at that point that day, to be quite frank with you. But Will just kind of made a joke and got Joseph laughing, and kind of like brought a lighthearted version of Joseph back to the surface. And I have to think that Will played that kind of connective glue role really well. And I think that was, I don't think that's something to be overlooked. And I think you've kind of got three drivers now that probably feel like they're all a little bit on an island together. Joseph and Scott are mature guys. They work together as teammates, but I just don't think there's probably going to be that cohesive bond, but in a driver lineup that I think can be really important, that we might see at Andretti Global, for example, or at Carpenter Racing, or even, I think, to some extent between versions of Arrow McLaren over the years.
Yeah, but I just immediately thought, like, didn't Malukas and McLaughlin, like in 2023, they were kind of friendly with each other for a good chunk of the season, and then they had that one moment. And then Gateway. And then I remember the following weekend, or Portland, I think, was the following weekend at that time in the schedule. It was one of those situations where Malukas talked about getting in McLaughlin's head, and he's like, nice to know that, a 21-year-old kid lives rent free in his head or whatever. McLaughlin, chose another road where he didn't want to respond to anything and just wanted to focus on the racing. But it's like little things like that. And we haven't really seen them return to any cohesiveness since then, any type of synergy or whatnot. So I'm really curious if they've moved past that, if they find a way to move past that, and maybe you get a little bit more harmony between those two back. And like you said, maybe it's not, all three have this vision or visible look, optics, if you will, that they're all three going to be on an island, because that's just, we know the demeanor of how they've all interacted with each other. If any of that changes, I'll be curious. And certainly we know that Malukas has an outgoing personality, so maybe there's an element of that. The other thing, let's talk about the elephant in the room with this just briefly. And that's, I'm wondering, we know who David Malukas' father is. We know he owns HMD Trucking. There's part of me that wonders if there's any type of thing on the back end from a B2B standpoint where we're going to see Team Penske and HMD Trucking having, some type of overlap together in the future.
A theory I've heard on that, and again, I don't know if this is true or not, but the one theory that has been mentioned to me from a prospective B2B link between these two that could make some sense is you could have HMD Trucking, whenever they have a truck that goes out of commission, they're buying Penske trucks. Now that's not like a massive thing, but there's something there, and it's been part of this that has never really been shot down. Now, I don't know that it necessarily would have been with the people involved. Folks at Penske are pretty hush-hush on anything that goes on behind the scenes from a business standpoint. So I don't know that we'll ever really necessarily learn how this came together or what the link was between Penske and Malukas this last year, if he was truly under a Penske contract like some people have claimed, if they had some sort of an option on him, or what was, what the requirements were to potentially go to Team Penske. I don't know. I don't know if we'll learn about that really, but you're right to point that out, that's an interesting part of all of this that still kind of looms, and we have lots of questions on.
No, for sure. So that's the Malukas thing.
Yeah, I want to make one more quick point
Yeah.
that I think is really interesting about drivers that Team Penske have hired. Now, there are a couple exceptions to this rule, but by and large, virtually every single full season driver that Team Penske has had on their IndyCar roster either have been drivers that have won championships or 500s before they came there, or are drivers who would go on to win 500s and championships at Team Penske, particularly over the last quarter century. This was always a factoid that Tim Cindric loved to point to. Obviously, he's the former president of Team Penske that is no longer there, fired in May. But he would love to point out that every single driver, bar one, during his tenure atop Team Penske of the IndyCar program, had won a championship or a 500 while they were employed by Team Penske. The only exception to that rule was Ryan Briscoe, who drove there for 5 years. I think won 7 races, finished a best of third in the championship, but ultimately didn't win either of those things. I think he drove there from 2008 to 2012. Started on pole in his last 500 at Team Penske, finished 5th, but never quite got to the mountaintop in either of those two things. McLaughlin obviously has been hired, is still at Team Penske, still has a long runway. I think probably will ultimately do one of those. We don't know yet. We don't know when, but what I'm getting to there is, like I said earlier, the expectation now for Malukas is not just to win races, it's to win multiple races in a year, and it is to win a 500 or a championship. And I don't know yet that we have a good enough feeling that he is someone who can do those things. I think there's a chance. They wouldn't hire him if there wasn't a chance. But we're going to learn a lot about David Malukas, I think, in the next couple of years, and ultimately what his IndyCar career is going to be. And a great sink or swim moment for him. Excited for him. Excited to see what he can do with this opportunity. I think if you would have told him, 18 months ago, that he would be a Team Penske driver after he got cut by Aaron McLaren and never drove a single race for them, I think he would have told you were crazy. But this is where we find ourselves, and we'll be very excited to see how this all pans out.
No, 100%. And you know what? If he goes and wins 3 races next year and finishes top 3 in the championship, then it wasn't a year ahead of schedule. It was right on schedule. So it'll be fantastic to see what he does. And honestly, equally excited to see what Will does in the 26 car as well. So the news we've been waiting on for what felt like 6 weeks, 6 weeks overdue, was we finally got the release of the IndyCar schedule for 2026. And as many of you found out over the weekend through social media, IndyCar announced that they would not be going to Mexico for next year. And that was confirmed when the schedule came out on Tuesday. So we've got some new interesting races, let's say, for the schedule, and certainly an interesting layout. We got our usual suspects in this. You've got your St. Petersburgs and your Long Beach, and obviously the 500 and Gateway and whatnot. But I want to pull the attention to some of the new things or new places on the schedule for some of these races. And one is, we've got a doubleheader with NASCAR on the Phoenix weekend right after St. Petersburg. So we're going back to back from St. Pete to Phoenix on that. And then, you move a little further in the schedule, and something that everyone kind of took note of was we now have a 400-mile race at Nashville Superspeedway, but it's no longer the finale. We're running that thing right after Mid-Ohio on July 19th as a lead-in to the World Cup final. And so that'll be cool.
Following the
World Cup final. Thank you. Sorry. And then, 2 weeks later, we've got that race in Markham that's no longer around Exhibition Place, but whenever we go to Canada, it's going to be around the city of Markham. And we got a doubleheader. IndyCar said they wanted to stay away from doubleheaders. We got them back. We continue the theme, August 29th and August 30th. And then we're ending the season, surprise, surprise, back on a road course. I'm sure that's everybody's favorite thing. At Laguna Seca on September 6th. So we get an extra week on the schedule, ending it in September 6th. We've got 4 races over the course of the opening 5 weeks. I'm going to throw it to you before, obviously, we'll go back and forth with this. But as you look at this schedule, anything that stands out to you, anything that you're especially high on, anything that you're especially low on?
I think my favorite part of the schedule, it's not any one single race, is just the way the season gets going in March. I mean, I think really ever since the pandemic, we've had these situations where 2021 we had to wait until the middle or end of April to get the season going because of just kind of the way things got shaken up a little bit. We 20 I think 22, 23, 24, we've just had these long gaps in between races. We'd get going in early March or late February, and then we'd have like 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'd have a race, and then it would be another 2 or 3 weeks. And it's just I think the worst instance of it was what that would have been 24, where we had like 6 weeks in between points paying races, and the thing that was in between there was thermal, and the joke of an exhibition that was. So we've got that fixed. We've got the pre 500 oval back on the calendar. I know Joey would love to have either a different oval or another oval in that mix, right down the road from him. I think we all would love that too, by the way. But that is, I think, the biggest transformation in this schedule is the fact that you have 3 races back to back to back to kick off the season. And then Barber moves up to the earliest it has ever been run on the calendar. The first time I think that race has ever been run in March. Will be very interesting to see how that just the course and the environment looks maybe a little bit different. I had been told by some sources in the paddock that Barber really didn't ever want to run outside of April or that first week of May, because things around that facility are just not quite green. The flowers aren't quite sprouted, and it doesn't quite have that look of the Augusta National of racing, if you want to use that moniker. And so that place might look a little different. It might feel a little different, might be a little cooler than normal. But all in all, I think that March, even though it does, even though it is followed by a month where we only have a single race, I don't think April will feel quite as quiet. You do have 2 off weekends between Barber and Long Beach. But after Long Beach, probably a week or so after, we will have the open test for a couple days. And then not long after that, we'll get into the road course race at IMS, and the month of May will just get going. And I don't think the effects of what April looks like just by itself will be quite as bad. And then the summer has really great pacing, but I think it is important to get rolling fast. That's why, for example, of the 4 Fox races of the 4 NASCAR races that Fox can run on network TV, I think they use 3 right out of the gate, right in a row, to try to get and hold on to audience as long as possible. And I know IndyCar is a little bit different in that their entire schedule is on Fox, and bravo to IndyCar and Fox for being able to put that together once again, though that was the expectation. But I think getting going with 4 races in 5 weeks, avoiding the big weekends of March Madness, avoiding the Masters, and hopefully we will find out later on, hopefully avoiding any like direct conflicts between an IndyCar race running on Fox and a NASCAR Cup Series race running on FS1, as we saw from time to time earlier this past year. I think that will be big for just kind of riding the momentum that you get from your season opening race and for an early season oval at Phoenix and for this new street race at Arlington as long as humanly possible. It's so much more difficult to do that if you say have a big race, your first or second one of the year, and then you have 3 weeks off and there's so much happening in the sports world, and it's really hard for casual fans or even like fairly decent fans of IndyCar who just kind of lose track of the sport between March and May when you only have a couple races. This is a very different vibe, and I think this can really help boost that, not only those TV numbers, but hopefully just build and find some casual fans along the way with the way in which the schedule falls and the consistency that it builds.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there's a lot there that I agree with what you said. I think that what's fascinating for me is whether it's a World Cup year or not going into 2026, for the World Cup being in the United States or throughout North America, I should say, is the energy level of the schedule feels different. I mean, I think that's first and foremost. Compared to 2025, it feels different. It feels better. Feels like it has a better cadence to it. There's a lot of intrigue for me with this schedule. One, obviously, we're all kind of curious what the Arlington thing is going to look like, not just from how's it going to race around the streets of Arlington, around a couple of stadiums with the Dallas Cowboys and the Texas Rangers, but what's the activation going to be like? What is Jerry Jones, the Dallas Cowboys owner, and the Rev Group and whatnot? What are they going to put together for something like this? So that's obviously the intrigue, but Phoenix has my attention. Obviously, the 400-mile race in Nashville is awesome. I love that we've extended that to 400 miles. I think that's proper. But Phoenix has my attention because I know there's maybe a few that are lulled about this because they're like, well, didn't we go to Phoenix a few years ago and the racing wasn't that great? And I think we've hit on something with the short oval package when you look at what we've done at Milwaukee, what we've done at Gateway. And I think it's worth an effort to try to go back to Phoenix with this package. I don't know how the Firestone and Goodyear tire compounds are going to mesh on an oval. The tire compounds that the Xfinity Series is going to be running on the same day that there's an IndyCar race, and then equally Cup practice is going to be there too. So that's something that I'm very intrigued by, and maybe there's a little bit more synergy there. We know that it's a Fox decision ultimately. I mean, I know it hadn't been said that, but I mean, you and I've been in the sport long enough to know that TV is the one that made certain decisions like that happen. So hopefully that's the first.
Essentially, I mean, it stinks that this is going to be the case, but we saw the years where IndyCar ran on the Saturday and Cup ran the Sunday at the same track. I mean, I think this IndyCar race is not going to be the whole reason it's on, but it is going to feel in a lot of ways like a commercial, I think, for the Fox broadcast the next day for Phoenix. That's just kind of how that shakes out.
Yeah, and that I think at the end of the day too, like, when you see that, I really hope that we're at a point in IndyCar land where we can stop recycling racetracks. And what I mean by that is
going to places that we have been, you might say.
Well, how many times do we see a situation? Obviously, I hope Texas Motor Speedway returns because I'm a homer, but it's one of those things where we went to Iowa for a bit and then we stopped going, and then it's back on the calendar for a bit and then we'll stop going. It's back on the calendar for a bit, and Iowa, is that going to be the same thing with Iowa? And I understand it's hard to figure out how to market on ovals to get people to come, and you run into this weird situation, and maybe they just haven't figured out a proper marketing business model to make it worthwhile yet. They need to hit on it so we're not recycling ovals so much. But with the TV situation, with Fox, with Phoenix tapping into a NASCAR market, obviously could be hugely beneficial. And who knows, maybe someone, gets excited and puts together a sponsorship package and can do the Xfinity race and the IndyCar race on the same day, or do a double. I know everybody loves whenever you can get a little bit of versatility like that in there. So that stuff's exciting to me. And then you can't hit the exciting things without talking about the things that are kind of frustrating. And that's like you touched on. And You definitely hit it. I don't necessarily know if I enjoy finishing the season at Laguna, and it's nothing to do with the racetrack. I love the racetrack. I think the racetrack is one of the best road courses in the world, let alone North America. It stands up there with Road America in terms of just the prestige. And we used to, in the old days, 30 years ago, whatnot, it wasn't uncommon to end the season at Laguna Seca. But the things that I get nervous about with this, and 100% keep Laguna on the schedule. I'm not going to sit there and say it doesn't need to be, needs to be on the schedule. But for the finale, the things that make me hesitant with that is because we've been there, we've done that, we've tried that. We didn't do it with Fox as a TV partner, which is the only thing that gives me a little bit of optimism that maybe the activation for that race is going to be different. But you and I have both been to that race when it's the season finale. We know there's not a whole lot of people that show up to that race. And unless there's some significant change, and we know that Friends of Laguna Seca, the group that's affiliated with WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, they've made a whole lot of different changes over the last few years, some positive impacts to that racetrack and how that racetrack impacts the community, because we all know about some of the community dramas around that for the county. If all those things have been rectified, this could be a lot of fun. I'll say that. But we all know with what we've seen the last couple of years at Nashville, and if Nashville wasn't the long-term answer for a season finale, I get it. But I think that we've all learned by now that we need to end the season on an oval, because the amount of crazy things and the amount of things that just seem to keep you on the edge of your seat with drama is endless on an oval. The style of racing we saw this past year, not knowing how, like, we didn't even know who was going to lead the race, because every time somebody led the race, somebody ended up with an issue. And then, it felt, flashback to a year ago, Will Power gets a chance to win that championship, but his belt's come undone 12 laps in the race. I mean, there's just so many different things that you go into that and you don't know. And I feel like it put a little bit more weight into the championship, in my opinion. But, and maybe this is just a brief 1 year thing. I appreciate the fact that they're willing to mix it up. And obviously, I think Nashville is the right choice for a follow-up from the World Cup. But that goes without question, that you want to try to seize that audience with probably one of your best races, if not the race of the year candidate this past year. So, and that makes complete sense. So with all that said, that's kind of how I'm looking at the schedule, as it were. I still would like to see us hit 20 race weekends as a whole over maybe a 26 race stretch. If you're going to run 6 months, run 6 months. If you got to start earlier, start earlier. But I would really like to see a window like that, or hell, run a midweek race in this case. Like when you're getting into the NFL season, if you're going to build into it a little bit, the only time they don't race is on Wednesday nights. Go run a Wednesday night and put a 10-day gap in your schedule a little bit there before the next race. Something to kind of change up the flair. Maybe they're not quite there yet and they're trying to build for that. I can't speak to that, but that's just some of the things that I look at the schedule, and that's my takeaways.
From a 30,000 feet standpoint, I think this is a very good schedule, but it is still a schedule that does not have that doesn't come without imperfections. You look at Phoenix. I was talking to someone in the paddock yesterday, and really thinking about how many people are really going to be in the grandstands at Phoenix. I think someone mentioned to me that, like maybe those stands hold somewhere around 40,000 people. How many people typically come out to an Xfinity race there? Is it half full? Is it a little under half full? And if that's the case, how many of those people that, are you going to get more people to show up because they want to watch both series, or are you then going to have the trade-off of some of those people, the Xfinity wise, not coming not necessarily showing up early to watch an IndyCar race. I don't know.
Let me go a step further with you on that, though, to that point, because I love where your head's at with that take. I actually had a different thought. One, I always believe you need to have asses in the seats in the grandstands in order to really capture an audience, and I prefer that over a TV number any day, because that's where you're really going to grab people, is by getting them to feel the energy, the atmosphere, the speed. Having said that, I think the one thing that's kind of cool and unique about this is that Saturday, there is, I don't know the TV schedule yet, neither do you, but for the most part, there's probably a pretty good chance that day, that Saturday for racing in Phoenix is going to flood FS1 and Fox like no other, because, they're going to have everything running on their networks that are affiliated with everything NASCAR and everything IndyCar that day. And
it'd be even better if Xfinity wasn't running on CW. That's like that's the one bummer there.
But you've got cup practice and all that stuff. Like, it's going to be in your face that day for sure. And to that end, we're still waiting on the Indy Next schedule, but if Indy Next is playing around with different things and on FS1, obviously I don't necessarily think Indy Next was going to be at Phoenix. They should be, but I don't think they will be. But yeah, I look at that and think that you're going to get racing in your face on a regular level. And, that
I don't want to see, I think the thing that would really stink is, again, I'm not claiming that it's going to be Iowa levels of embarrassing in terms of fan turnout. Certainly don't expect that, but I hate going to ovals.
But IndyCar doesn't have to promote it either, because that's a NASCAR weekend. So there's going to be NASCAR.
That's true. There's something to that, and I'm sure I'm sure NASCAR will use that to whatever it is worth to them. I mean, ultimately, they can get, I don't know how this business deals worked, but you would imagine IndyCar going there and whatever fee they had to pay to get on the ticket, so to speak. They're going to get some more people to buy tickets. And I think someone in the paddock told me the other day that they actually called Phoenix to find out, and it's just going to be like a single day ticket, which is what you would expect. But that means that if you were already going to the Xfinity race and you have some sort of interest in IndyCar, you should just show up a couple hours earlier and you can watch the IndyCar race. And you can show up for the entire day. And now it's not just Cup practice and qualifying and Xfinity, qualifying in a race. You've got everything IndyCar related. I imagine the race weekend for IndyCar will start on Friday. They'll maybe get practice and qualifying in on Friday and then run on Saturday is my guess, I would assume. But I just, in mentioning that, I hope that the synergy of this weekend with IndyCar ultimately running, it's not been finalized or formally announced, but Doug Bowles told us on a news conference on Tuesday that the expectation is that IndyCar will be racing before Xfinity. So that's probably like early afternoon locally and maybe mid-afternoon on the East Coast, which isn't bad from a TV standpoint, even though it is a Saturday. Saturday is obviously never going to be quite as good as Sunday. I just hope, though it is great that we do have an early oval back on the schedule, I just hope that this isn't a late turnout crowd that folks will show up for the Xfinity race afterwards. We lived the 3 years that IndyCar was back at Phoenix from 2016 to 2018, and there were almost no people that showed up for those races. And so I hope that the fact that Xfinity and Cup and IndyCar could all be on the track on the same day, get enough people interested to show out to where this can make sense. Because this, Bowles did tell us on Tuesday too, this is just a 1 year thing for right now. This is we're going to feel this out. We're going to see how this works. We're going to, they've done this for 3 years at IMS on the road course. But they want to see how this could work and how this could potentially benefit both sides. I hope this is something that wouldn't fall off the schedule after just 1 year, but there's always the chance for that. As I kind of go through other question marks I have, I guess I would say on the schedule, Arlington, everything we've heard about it sounds super. And I hope it is everything that we are being told it will be. But part of me worries about expectations being a little bit too high and being a little bit let down. I mean, let's not forget, this is still the same ownership group that told us that the Nashville street race was going to be the Monaco of IndyCar, which just was like a laughable line. And now we don't have that race in the schedule anymore.
It's a hell of a one to look back on. Oh my gosh.
The same group and that same person have told us that Arlington for IndyCar is going to be everything that the Miami Grand Prix has been for Formula One. And I think we need to keep in mind that the Miami Grand Prix this year, I think, reportedly drew a weekend audience of 275,000 people. There was a Sports Business Journal article that was written about Arlington a couple of weeks ago, maybe right around when tickets went on sale. And they said they expect to have as much as 100,000 people there for the whole weekend. Now, that's not bad, but that's not even St. Pete numbers. That's not, certainly is not Long Beach numbers. Long Beach is like 200,000 people for the weekend. So when I read that, I felt like that was, I mean, maybe that is really truly realistic, and I appreciate them for not pumping this up to be even more than what it would turn out to be. But I have some questions about how big this is actually going to be and feel, and whether this is going to be a kind of a Detroit Grand Prix feel, in the way in which that event feels like it is so much for the B2B Penske Corp sponsor crowd. And there are some fans now. This is obviously a very different thing. This is a street course around some awesome pro sports stadiums, and Detroit is truly downtown in an urban market. So they're not similar in that way. But I hope that this event is as big as I think it deserves and could be, and as big as we have told it will be. And that's kind of where my questions lie for that. And you always have question marks going into a first year of a street race, I think. My other, I don't know, frustration or question mark is on the way in which Nashville has lost its spot as the finale over the next several years. Doug Bowles and Mark Miles told us in that news conference on Tuesday that this is not just a one-time switch up with Laguna and Nashville. This is a multi-year, for the foreseeable future change. My guess is, because I think we believe that Laguna Seca still, I think this was maybe its last year contract-wise. My guess is that this is a reworked contract with them, and it is now written into that deal that probably for the next 3 years that Laguna Seca is going to be our finale. That's my guess on that. And so that's why that would have to be a multi-year thing, and not just something that we're making a switch for this year. And so I think it will be ultimately really cool to see what TV number Nashville can get. I think that is, when you're looking at the races that could have run in that prime slot on the calendar, that outside the Indy 500 should certainly draw the biggest TV audience that we have next year. You look at Laguna or Portland or Nashville. I mean, those were the ones that were coming to mind as potential options for that in the back half of the calendar that weren't yet set up. Nashville is head and shoulders the best fit for that. If you are hoping that there are enough people that just leave their TVs on after the end of the World Cup, I was talking to someone yesterday, like, best case scenario is that you have Mexico in the final, and you are doing tune-in ads during the World Cup with Pato O'Ward speaking in Spanish to people in the United States who speak that language, who are from Mexico, who are Mexico soccer fans. If they don't yet know about Pato O'Ward and they see a Spanish-speaking driver from their home country or from a country where they have family from, maybe you get them to tune in. But you've got to hope essentially that enough people keep their TVs on, or find out that there's some sort of a race and are mildly interested. And the best thing you can do is go straight from the trophy ceremony to a couple minutes of pre-race, and then you get right into racing, because you want to keep those folks interested as long as possible. And there's nothing that could kill that like a ho-hum start to a Laguna Seca race where Alex Palou or Scott Dixon or whoever kind of just runs away, and all of a sudden they've got a 5 or 6 second lead in the first 20 or 30 laps, which is oftentimes what happens there. Nashville is great for that. We saw side-by-side racing between Pato and Palou for lap after lap after lap. And as you mentioned, this year, it was like no one wanted to lead that race because of the things that were happening to guys who were either out front or right around out front. And it was an exciting edge of your seat race, and one that had the third largest TV audience that we've seen for this year. That being said, Nashville then in 27 goes back to kind of just another summer race on the calendar. And I think that's kind of a bummer, because that is your second largest oval that you have outside the Indy 500. And it just feels like that race is so perfectly constructed. Again, 40 minutes away from downtown Nashville, but still a place that gives you some optionality to be able to make that feel a little bit bigger with some concerts, or entertaining sponsors downtown, and then using shuttles to get them to and from the racetrack on Saturday and Sunday. I think this is probably the best case scenario between those two events for 26. I hate that we're losing that for years beyond, and I think we might look at that maybe in 27 and wish that was a little different, and that's just what we've got. So again, I think the best way to frame it, I think there are a lot of positive things about the schedule, but I think this is still a work in progress. This is still far from perfect. And I think I would say after 6 years, I wish we were a little bit closer to feeling like the schedule was what it was going to be for the foreseeable future. And we're just not quite there yet. We're a lot closer than we were a year or two ago. I think you do great things by dropping thermal and the doubleheader at Iowa, although I wish we didn't have to then add a doubleheader at Milwaukee, because I think one big, awesome race at Milwaukee, from my opinion, is better than two races where you kind of split your TV audience a little bit and you split your in-person audience, because folks maybe can't go to both races, and so they have to pick and choose, and both of those numbers are maybe a little bit less than what they otherwise would have been, and it's not great necessarily for teams. So that's where I come out of all of this. Lots of great things about this, but still some things to work on and to improve upon in the next year or two, and hopefully Penske Entertainment can get that done.
No, 100%. And it's continuing to grind the gear, continuing to move forward. It's a little slower than we'd like, but it is steady. And I will say this though, and this is probably my one of two final thoughts, which is just because, how do I want to frame this? We're not going to Mexico next year or in 2026, but we need to be there for 2027. Otherwise, this redundancy that's gone on for more than a decade of we're talking to them, we're talking to Mexico. I can't hit this home hard enough. Is just the fact that at some point you do it.
It's put up or shut up time at this point in my eyes.
100%. And so I don't want to hear. There's been so many different things that we've talked about over the years, and at the end of the day, like, we have to be in Mexico. Like, we have to, and that's it. That's all there is to it. And outside of that, my other final thought, something that you tweeted yesterday, in reference to, but that's free willpower. Let the man go test race cars before December. So,
agree with that wholeheartedly. Feel like if you've got a driver announced for a car, you shouldn't necessarily be holding on to a contract for the guy that was in that car the previous year. But I know there are lots of things connected to that. He's still getting paid. I'm sure he appreciates still getting paid and not having to do anything for it. I also imagine that if it was remotely reasonable, I bet the billionaires that own Andretti Global would pay whatever reasonable sum of money it would be to get willpower, and that would be off of Team Penske's books, and they wouldn't have to be paying someone who's not doing anything for them. Now, granted, I know Penske hasn't gotten to where they are without being smart business people and savvy racers and competitors, but it just feels a little weird. Again, this is the contract that Will Power negotiated. But I also think he's a guy that did everything for you for 17 years and won you more IndyCar races than anyone ever has, and was a loyal company man who quite literally didn't have an agent or a manager up until this year, where he felt like he was getting pushed out the door, and just asked for what folks thought were reasonable, and that was the contract that they put together. And so that's where we are. Could go on a lot more on that, but we will leave you guys here for more on Mexico. Certainly, I've got a piece up on IndyStar.com, just kind of more about the explanation on why 2026 was so difficult. And I admit, I feel a little bit like I understand that is a reasonable explanation more than I did this Saturday, when that was quite literally buried in the madness of Saturday college football. Props to the PR folks that executed that. But that's where we'll leave you guys. Excited to finally have the schedule in front of us, see what it looks like, and start thinking about what the 2026 IndyCar schedule can be. So thanks as always for listening. This is the Inside Line. For Joey Barnes, I'm Nathan Brown. Thanks for listening.